It is season 11 of Krown Gridiron Nation. This is about college football. This is about Canadians, and it's about football in Canada. I'm Jim Mullen. With me is Gord Randall in Vancouver, and sitting in for Mike Hogan. He hasn't got over his CFL on TSN experience of play-by-play. You can tell by the headsets he's wearing. Marshall Ferguson in the GTA. Canadians in the NCAA. Let's get you caught up on our 2-minute warning. John Mechie III continues to roll with the Tide. Number 1 Alabama over number 14 Miami. 6 receptions for the 2020 Cornish Trophy winner. 76 yards and a TD to boot. Penn State big on D in the 16-10 win over Wisconsin. 7 tackles for Jonathan Sutherland. 5 tackles and a quarterback hurry for Ottawa linebacker Jesse Luketa. Loads of Canadians, but no results for the Yukon Huskies. They are 0-2, losing 38-28 to Holy Cross. Montreal quarterback Jack Zergiotis threw 3 TDs, ran for 1, but he went 17 for 41 for 174 and 3 picks. A light upset as West Virginia loses by 6 to Maryland, but it was a great day for sophomore D lineman Akeem Mesidor, 9 tackles and 1.5 tackles for loss. Alonzo Adai had 3 tackles, a TFL, and a pass breakup. Peterborough's Jared Wayne had 6 receptions for 55 yards to lead Pitt to a 51-7 pasting of those UMass Minutemen. Lots of CanCon in the Syracuse 29-9 win over Ohio. Ohio Bobcats QB Curtis Rourke looks like he's the starter, going 21 of 28 for 142. The Orange were led on D by Jeffrey Canton-Arcou with 7 tackles. Number 22 Coastal Carolina by 38 over the Citadel. 5 tackle for Lachine, Quebec's Enoch Maconzo. Boise State loses 31-36 at UCF, where Lethbridge Collegiate Institute grad Isaiah Bagnut had 4 solos and 2 sacks, but it was in vain. Buffalo stampeded Wagner 69-7. Senior receiver Dominic Johnson with a pair of catches for the Bulls. Hawaii receiver Nick Mardner led the Warriors with 4 receptions for 97 yards and a tutty in a 49-35 win over Portland State. There are 82 NCAA Division I teams with Canadians on their rosters, 154 athletes in total by our last count. So guys, we don't have to decide on one team, but give me your 1A and 1B early season candidates for Team Canada, and I'll start with Gord.
Well, my early season candidate for Team Canada, as I declared on Twitter this past weekend, has got to be the Penn State Nittany Lions. A grand total of 5 Canadians on the roster, headlined by starting linebacker Jesse Luketa, who is one of the best Canadian linebackers we've seen in a long, long time. He's now in his 2nd year of starting full-time, 3rd year of seeing a lot of field time on that Penn State defense, and he is supported by a handful of the Canadians. A couple other names you may see involved this year. Jonathan Sutherland is back for a post-grad year in the secondary. He's mostly a special teams guy at this point. Another guy you may start to see, though he's down the depth chart on offense, is Theo Johnson, the big tight end. But Jesse Luketa is the headliner there, and if I were to choose a second team, it would be the Syracuse Orange, who also have 5 Canadians on their roster, headlined by another linebacker in Jeffrey Canton-Arcou. So lots of Canadian content on those 2 teams in the Northeast.
Yeah, for me, Gord, I think that I would look at a team that perennially has Canadian talent on it, which is, of course, Buffalo, right? There's been so many great linemen that have come out of there, and I think they've got another nice group that they've pieced together that's got a little bit of that Canadian flavor at various points of their defense as well. So I like the way that they look, but the team for me, because when I'm thinking of Canada's NCAA team, what I'm really looking at is whether or not they have that top-end talent and players that will make an impact in the Canadian Football League if they don't make it to the NFL. And Alonzo Adai alongside Deshaun Stevens, the main transfer at linebacker, I think, to me, despite the fact Deshaun Stevens didn't register a statistic in their first game, the loss, unfortunately, for WVU against Maryland, I think those 2 guys will be an impact in the Canadian Football League when they get an opportunity. So I like West Virginia University as the team the Canadians should be watching this season.
Now, there is a D2 team in Canada. That is Simon Fraser. But most of the headliners on that roster are from the U.S. Pacific Coast. And how is this for irony? They were beaten 68-0 by Idaho in their opener. The Vandals were led by Regina native Mike Beaudry at quarterback. Next up, is there any one of the 154 Canadians who could challenge Brampton, Ontario's sophomore and defending Cornish winner John Mechie III as the top Canadian stateside? Marshall, we're talking about the number one target on the defending national champion Alabama Crimson Tide. Who's going to challenge him?
Well, let me make the argument here for you, Jim, because I believe that you could look at a name like it's got to be an offensive skill player. It's got to be somebody who's going to get a bunch of touches. The best I can come up with is Chase Brown at Illinois, and he has no chance of catching John Mechie III. It is a runaway. It is a landslide. If anyone's going to do it, they're going to have to far exceed the expectations that we've placed on them and the things that we've seen from them in previous years, because Mechie is the brightest shining star across the Canadian football landscape right now when it comes to the NCAA. I have a really hard time imagining anybody getting close to him.
Well, I do think that it would be a shame if we were to pigeonhole yet another football-related award to offensive skill guys. And last year on my Cornish ballot, for example, Eamon Bamiga was my vote for the Cornish Trophy winner last year, and not John Mechie. I actually had him third on my ballot. Alonzo Ade was second. So I'm not one of those ones, former offensive lineman as I am, I'm not one of those ones that just fixates on offensive skill guys. And there are some other guys in the conversation, including the aforementioned Alonzo Ade, who's back at West Virginia. You've got the aforementioned Jesse Lukita at Penn State. And let's not forget Enoch McConzo, who had a fantastic breakout year last year at Coastal Carolina, as that team turned into what looked like a national powerhouse. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I got to throw some love to my O-line union. Dante Bull, starting at left tackle, had a tough debut when Kayvon Thibodeau, the surefire NFL lottery pick, was in the game. He settled down quite nicely afterwards. He's leading the CFL Central Scouting Bureau early rankings right now. He could have a very strong season. Sage Dockstader is back at New Mexico State. So you've got offensive linemen across the board. I can't forget Liam Dobson at Texas State. That should, though they probably won't, be in consideration for the award as well. But the reality is that it's John Mechie's to lose. So long as he stays healthy and puts in a full season, it will probably not be a close vote. But you guys can look at the final results and know that I'm just stewing over the lack of O-line love in the final.
So the question is, where would Mechie fall into our first edition of the Stateside Five? It's Lethbridge sophomore Isaiah Bagna, who promises to be a force this season on the blue turf in Boise. 4 solos, 2 sacks for the Bagman. We've seen flashes, now we are witnessing consistency from Hawaii's Nick Martner out of Mississauga. 4 receptions, 97 yards and a TD against Portland State. 7 for 132 and a TD over 2 games for the 6'6" junior. When you're a D1 QB trained in Canada and you go 21 of 28, that is Stateside 5 material. It was a loss for Curtis Rourke and the Ohio Bobcats, but it's confirmed he's their starter. Jared Wayne led the Pitt Panthers with 6 receptions for 55 yards in a 51-7 pounding of the UMass Minutemen. And get ready for this a lot this season. In at 1, John Mechie III, 6 for 76 and a TD for the top target for the Tide. Brampton represent. When we return, it is the return of U Sports. U Sports, we missed you so much. Thanks to Quebec, it's time for the 3-minute warning. Laval Concordia, about what you'd expect. Rouge et Or up 17-2 at the half. It was never close. Connu gave up 4 safeties in the first 39 minutes. Laval quarterback Thomas Bolduc was 22 of 33 for 267 and 2 strikes to the end zone. 33-7 your final. McGill and Sherbrooke, the lead changed hands in this one 3 times. The Dimitri Sinadinos to Matthew Susi combo found the promised land twice for the Redbirds. 21-18 your final for the Scotsmen. I look at the standings in Quebec, and Laval and Montreal are in that usual place. It's the penthouse, although the McGill Redbirds have been a solid 1-1. Guys, all of us here on this show want Canadian university football to prosper. No time here for the mistakes of the past 7 or so years. The question to you first, Gord, I want you guys to talk about this, is how do they make this work? Both of you guys, give us a big idea.
Well, I will say that one of the things that they can start with is giving a break to people wanting to go watch the game. I understand that a lot of these programs are really hurting for revenue at this point in time, but I think this is not the time to be reaching into people's pockets to try and make up your shortfalls. I think if these programs can approach this season with the long-term goal in mind of getting back to relevance first, reestablishing your fan base so that you have something to fall back on, I think that would benefit the majority of them. And I want to give a shout out to UBC out here in our neck of the woods. I've been told that they are changing their policy and allowing their fans in for free to their games this fall. That is a great step in the right direction, even just as a temporary measure to say, hey guys, don't forget about us. We're back. Come check it out. It's on us this year. And I think that that's a first step back to relevance. But a lot of these universities, I think, are going to be taking long, hard looks at these programs and seeing if they're willing to invest the time and money that they need to in order for them to be relevant. And with that year missing that they just skipped, some universities, I hope they won't, but they may be second guessing it. That's a looming specter on the horizon, unfortunately, and I don't know what the easy solutions to that are.
Yeah, and I know from where I'm looking at in the OUA out here in Ontario, Gord, that they've talked about the fact that there's not going to be those student fees necessarily going in towards Ontario University athletics. So there is some shifting and moving in terms of the financial properties that everyone is used to using in terms of who gets what cut and how they get it. So I think that that makes a lot of sense. But in terms of prospering moving forward, we always in Canada, when you're talking about U Sports football, talk about the television rights and the deal and being able to spread the products. I believe that for now, that's not necessarily going to be the home run that we should be focusing on. I'm talking guerrilla warfare on this, right? Small, mobile, and being able to get your message out to as many people as possible. We have never lived in a time where social media has been so accessible and so followed by so many people. I think U Sports Football has to access that. I think you have to be able to highlight your best players. You need to make sure that you actually have highlights out there for people, small snippets, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. I don't care what platform you're using. Get the goods out there because the goods exist and we need to share them to as many people as possible.
I couldn't agree more. It's not that you're just marketing to alumni who are in their 50s and 60s. You got to understand that your current students are a huge part of your prospective fan base, and your recent alumni who are also super active on these platforms are prospective fans as well. So you've got to connect with them, and the best way to connect with them in the year 2021 is through those short snippets, through those platforms that people are on already that you don't have to make them go and seek out where they can find these games. Accessibility is crucial for U Sports because accessibility is exposure, which is what they desperately need. I'm seeing the same battle when I'm working with my high school program on a smaller scale, in that we miss a year, so we are out of the collective consciousness, and U Sports needs to work to address that along the lines of these ways of reaching out to people in different platforms and being in their face with U Sports content.
Well, the first CFL Scouting Bureau was rolled out, and on the front end, it was dominated by Canadians south of the line. Victoria native and Belmont secondary grand Dante Bull leads the list, and no surprise, he's an offensive lineman. CFL loves those guys. Only 7 of the 20 hailed from U Sports schools, and 4 of the 7 were twins, the Philpott twins in Calgary and the Ford twins out of Waterloo. Guys, which of these players are NFL bound and which could be a better fit for a CFL roster? I'll throw that to Marsh first.
Yeah, for me, I think that Jalen Philpott's got a real opportunity if he bulks up a little bit to get a look down south. Now, he's not exactly your prototypical style of going down and playing in the 4-down version, but I think he's got the athleticism. I think he's got the speed. It kind of reminds me a little bit of what Rashawn Simoniz had going on when he was at the University of Calgary, where he got a look in Cincinnati before he bounced back and has been with a couple of different CFL clubs looking for work. But to me, Jalen Philpott's pretty special. And then, man, when you talk about the Ford brothers, like, that is athleticism perceived. And I feel like they've got to get an opportunity very quickly in the CFL to show what they can do, because another member of Waterloo's former teammates of the Ford brothers, Tyler Ternowski, gets onto the dress roster with the Hamilton Tiger Cats within a month of playing in his rookie season in the CFL. So there's talent there in that program. It's been proven, and these guys are the star of all stars in the OUA going into 2021.
You know, I got to say, like, I was surprised that the Philpott twins didn't get more of a look down south coming out of high school. I knew them quite well in the prep school ranks here in BC. You know, their dad had connections down in the SEC. They had dual citizenship. I thought they were an easy call to be going Div 1 down to the States, and they ended up going to Calgary. So there's always a chance. I do believe their talent is at that level. But if you look at Canadians going down and getting a real shot in the NFL, you're looking for athletic outliers. Right? You're looking at guys, most recent example, Ryson John, who's making some headway, or was at least with the New York Giants before getting hurt in the preseason. But this is a guy that was an athletic outlier, a 6'6" guy that had the speed to play true receiver, but had the frame to be able to bulk up and play tight end and be a move tight end. Those are the types of guys that NFL teams are looking for when they come up to places like the Canadian University ranks, in those body types and those athletes that are rarer. And unfortunately for all four of these guys, their body types are not standout body types, and they're going to have exquisite athleticism in order to get a legitimate shot in the States. I just don't know if that happens beyond a token minicamp invite that we're seeing more and more of as the years progress.
As the season progresses, we will get you up to speed on what CFL drafted players are doing in the NCAA. Good news, bad news day for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Main transfer O-lineman Liam Dobson got his first start at Texas State, but quarterback Patrice Rene did not play for Rutgers. He was sidelined for most of 2020 with an ACL tear. Coming up, what do you want to know? Maybe it's what we want to know. Hang around. The CJFL is back underway. That's junior football in the West End, Ontario. And the big future game will be the feature battle of the undefeated when Regina travel to the Gordie Howe Bowl to face the national champion Saskatoon Hilltops. Triple W2K, what do you want to know? What's something that you don't have an answer to heading into this weekend, Gord Randall?
Well, we did talk about it earlier, so I'm going to hit on it again. But which of the Canadians, other than the aforementioned John Mechie, is going to step up maybe from out of the spotlight and start bringing themselves into the national consciousness and into being a more relevant factor this year? We're already seeing Isaiah Bagna maybe being the early leader in that category. But there were a few box score performances that were a little bit underwhelming this first week. Guys that we thought might have bigger roles than they ended up having. Ajo at Clemson, for example. Enoch McConzo at Coastal Carolina was pretty quiet. Tyrell Richards at Syracuse, another example. So which of these kinds of guys that we're not talking about right now are we going to start to see make a name for themselves, like Alonzo Ade did last year, like Enoch McConzo did last year? Who's going to come out from nowhere and be that guy that we're talking about week after week, even in passing on this program?
Yeah, and for me, Jim, I'm looking at Mike Beaudry and what he's going to do with the Idaho Vandals right now, because we're seeing this resurgence of Canadian quarterbacking between Michael O'Connor and Nathan Rourke, obviously being in the CFL right now with BC and with Calgary. And I'm wondering, how much can Beaudry push himself into the conversation where maybe we get to the 2022 CFL season? We're talking about 3 legitimate Canadian quarterbacks that are in and around those rosters. He's got lots of work to do, but not a bad start to the season.
A total of 7 Canadians on Division I rosters as quarterbacks. Pick of the week coming up next. U Sports point spreads do not exist, so guess what? We invented them. Only 2 games. They're in Quebec, where the over-unders are low, but the point spreads are vast. Laval is off to winless Sherbrooke with an over-under of 34.5, and Laval is favored by 13.5, according to us. Montreal hosts Concordia at Sepsum, and you may see Yukon transfer Jonathan Senecal finally let loose for the Carabin. But until he is, the over-under on this one is 39.5, with Montreal favored by 14.5. Guys, time for your picks of the week, and I will start off with Marshall.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm looking around, I think that Laval looks like they're just ready to cruise, and I also think that Montreal is. They're in a great position right now with the way that they have looked going through the early part of camp and season. So I like them, and it's. I think that's going to be the trend going forward, is those two monsters sticking at the top of the conversation.
And I'm going to look down south of the line at Rutgers, Syracuse, and we already talked a little bit about both of these teams. On the Rutgers side, when is Patrice Rene going to start making an impact on that squad? You know, the Blue Bombers are obviously invested in hoping that he gets some serious time. That's one of the reasons they encouraged him to go back and stay in the States as a grad transfer. He starts at Rutgers. Hopefully he starts getting more involved as the weeks progress and he gets further and further removed from that ACL injury. But Rutgers is coming off a strong start and a win to their season. This is a program with Greg Schiano coming back, who is striving to return to relevance and make an impact in the Big Ten really for the first time, and since Schiano left before they entered that conference. So they're a program that is looking to continue making some positive headway like they did in week one. Syracuse, on the other hand, I talked about their CanCon earlier. One guy I didn't mention, Matt Bergeron, who started on the offensive line in their first game. They had an impressive opening week victory over Curtis Rourke in the Ohio Bobcats. So both of these teams coming into this one 1-0. Plenty of Canadian content, certainly on the one side, hopefully on the other as well. This one should be a good one to watch this weekend.
Yeah, sure. I'll hit on the American games as well. I think for me, it's honestly, and this might not be the sexiest matchup ever, Jim, but I'm looking at Purdue UConn, right? No less than 7 or 8 Canadians in and around that roster. You talk about transfers going back the other direction to the Montreal Carabin, but it is chaos right now with UConn, with Randy Edsall deciding after 2 games, and I got blowout loss to Fresno State 45-0 to start the season, gets beat up by FCS side Holy Cross as well in week number 2, and he says, you know what, I'm going to retire at the end of the season. And UConn says, no, you're going to retire right now. And so he steps aside. They've got a new interim coach coming in. They've got their starting quarterback, Canadian Zergiotis, who's from Montreal, stepping aside. They're going to put in the backup to go into week number 3. But those Canadian guys, like I'm watching that game because of the Canadian connection, and I want to see whether or not they are able to weather the storm, because UConn football is not going anywhere fast right now. But there's a lot of really talented players that have potential that are Canadian on that team. So I consistently have my eye on them. And this weekend they've got Purdue. So I want to see how that one shakes out amongst all the chaos.
Guys, thanks very much for this. We got the first one out of the way. And like we always say at the end of one of these, let's get out to the game.